everybody is, but actually it's the other thing that's an illusion. You know, they were awful in the first place. Everybody was dishonest. Things were murky and complicated in the first place. You can't simplify it like this.
But Joe says that this film could have been done in 2004. It doesn't tell us anything we didn't know. But isn't it, in a sense, the job of a dramatist and a filmmaker to bring this to light for a wider audience?
Oh, I bought the thrust of the film initially. I bought the thrust of the film for a good 3/4 of the film. I rather enjoyed the fact that it was a thriller that was driving us along in the Bourne-style fashion. There was some bad dialogue, and there were some clunky scenes where our hero arrives and has to kind of say, "Oh my goodness, there are no weapons of mass destruction here."
How can that be the case? You're off the reservation.
So that was all awkward, but I bought the thrust. I think what happens though is that about 3/4 of the way through the movie, it's holed below the waterline, precisely for the reasons that Greengrass has just explained. That he decided to go with the conspiracy theories. He decided to have a hero who is trying to find the truth about weapons of mass destruction, and then he, as a director, decides to make something up halfway through. He decides that it's perfectly legitimate in his film to suggest that the Americans just faked it all.
And did it with the complicity of Saddam's generals. So you're supposed to believe that Saddam's generals...
Let's look at this complicity. Let's look right now, because central to the story, and I think this is what Mar's alluding to, is the idea that journalists were duped by the Pentagon into writing stories about WMD.
We're in the 85th. It's WMD unit, right?
How'd you know that?
It's right there on your rifle. Lori Dane, Wall Street Journal. How's it going?
You know, we haven't found it yet. Hey, Sergeant Perry.
We'll find it. It's frustrating, right?
A little bit.
So what are you and Marty talking about?
Oh, you know I can't talk to you about that.
Oh, come on. You come in fresh off the field to have a lemonade with Martin Brown? Something's got to be going on.
Well, you could ask him.
I'm asking you. Does it make sense to you that we're still coming up empty?
No. No, it doesn't.
Come on, Joe, there were plenty of journalists prior to the invasion, at the time when Hans Blix was back in from November 2002 to March 2000, who were writing endlessly stories after Pentagon briefings about WMD.
First of all, he's got the wrong newspaper because it's the New York Times.
Well, of course he has, but that's fine.
No, but it's so important because the Wall Street Journal is a conservative thing which supported the war, and the New York Times, it was the fact that Judith Miller, the journalist, wrote these stories. So to have that error in the film is just astonishing.
But it seems to me that the reason we have that journalist is really to sort of help as a plot device to then finally say that there will be some kind of conclusion, there will be some idea that the truth will come out. So we kind of needed sort of the honest journalist who had been duped, but then finds some kind of redemption.
It's such a bystander as well, which is a real shame.
The other thing I just wanted to say was, you know, you were talking about how the film could have been made 4 or 5 years ago. It seems to be one of the problems with the film is it seems to have been filmed with a lot of hindsight. So a lot of the reservations that we have now are being put into the mouths of characters filmed in 2004.
He saw everything in every movie about Iraq that didn't work, and he said, I'm going to make a movie where Matt Damon's on screen the entire time. The charismatic guy is going to be on screen. You're going to like him because that's what all the other movies didn't do. They were ambivalent, or you have a hero in the movie.
But he didn't seem to resolve in his own mind the fact that he was making a fiction about the truth. That's something. So what's fine about that particular scene is that accurately portrays what was happening. In a fictional form, it accurately portrays what was happening with journalists. They were being duped by the Americans, but they were being duped by real intelligence that was coming to them from the Iraqis that they were buying.
Do you not think you're getting a bit tangled up in semantics, though? Because it seems to me that the central thing that a lot of people believe is that the idea that the Americans essentially wanted to go to war, and they would have found any excuse to do so. So how different is that from inventing, as in...
But hang on a minute. The British, I mean, America was slightly different in this, wasn't it? The British were sold the idea that, you know, the point was that there was unequivocal evidence
Yeah.
that there was WMD. Now, that was what was happening here. Now, in America, it might have been different.
But there was more to do with the links between Al-Qaeda, Afghanistan, 9/11, and also the possible, you know, the domino ideas. But I don't think the WMD was an absolutely decisive factor in terms of why
Where's
the Americans...
Al-Qaeda in this movie?
There is no Al-Qaeda.
Where's Al-Qaeda? You have the Iraqi generals who are supposed to be the ones going to lead the insurgency, and you don't have Al-Qaeda in this. I mean, what kind of film, what kind of history is that doesn't have Al-Qaeda in the movie?
But how do you think it'll play in the States? How do you think the issue of
Good
WMD...
Matt Damon movie. I agree with whoever said it was. You said it was a bit like a video game. I think the thing that's interesting to me is a filmmaker's basic objective is to make a movie that people like, and Matt Damon can carry a film. And that's what interested me about the film was this is the first movie about Iraq that could actually make money because Matt Damon does a great job, and it doesn't matter.
It's not just that, it's that it concludes. It's a very neat little film. You know, there is the evil guy and the truth is out and good wins, which simply isn't the case in reality.
Well, the issue of WMD was raised several times during Gordon Brown's appearance at the Chilcot inquiry. The Prime Minister said at the time he believed the intelligence that there was WMD, and despite the failure of that intelligence, he said the war was right. Here he is speaking about what he was being told at the time.
What I really want to establish is whether you saw this as a real and present danger in March 2003.
The evidence that we had, I met the intelligence services on a number of occasions during the course of 2002 and early 2003. And in addition to my discussions in the Cabinet, and in addition to my discussions with Tony Blair himself, I was given information by the intelligence services which led me to believe that Iraq was a threat that had to be dealt with by the actions of the international community. When I had questions to ask about the intelligence, and I've reported to you the meetings I had with the intelligence services, they were telling me information that had not only been confirmed by their security services, but by other countries' security services as well. We have subsequently discovered that the sources of these intelligence reports to a number of different intelligence authorities were probably the same and the wrong sources. But at that time, I had full briefings from the intelligence services, and I was given information that seemed credible or plausible at the time.
Well, let's talk about Gordon Brown's performance, but first just picking up there. You know, Paul Greengrass said he was absolutely convinced of the argument in the run-up to whether the WMD, and it seems exactly the same. That is what Brown is saying. He had various intelligence service meetings, and he believed the WMD. Now, there was much more scepticism in the country, wasn't there?
Well, I mean, there was layer after layer after layer of intelligence briefings going into government suggesting that the weapons were there. There was scepticism within the country. I, myself, was not entirely convinced, I have to say, and I wondered why it was that the weapons inspectors weren't really finding anything. Obviously, it was being made difficult for them.
So Gordon Brown, in his taking it head on there and saying he believed it, but saying in the end it didn't really matter that they weren't there. Tactically, how did he play? How do you think he played that committee?
The way everybody said he would in the newspapers. It's not apparent to the untrained American eye why so many people dislike him, because he's a smooth operator. And particularly after you've, first of all, seeing the Prime Minister being not interrogated, because it's mostly softball questions, but we don't have that in the United States. The President of the United States doesn't sit there and get grilled by people. So that part of it is impressive, and he just deflected all the questions away.
But he also gave a lot away. I thought the fascinating thing about what he said was the admission that he said that he's only really discovered what foreign affairs means since he's been Prime Minister.
That's a bit of a worry.
So that's a slight worry, especially as he's having all these discussions with these intelligence people telling him stuff.
Well, he's a finance guy, right?
So he's a finance guy.
But does it really mean then that the way that he handled, that it's a sleight of hand in WMD now, it just doesn't matter? It's a footnote in history. Anna, would you ever imagine that would have happened?
Well, I think in a way it is something of a distraction, because the key thing in Gordon Brown's evidence is Was he responsible for the fact that we ended up being effectively defeated in Iraq and allowed
I actually thought the key thing really was the war legal? He wants to sit there and reassure us that we have actually done the right thing, ghastly though it may have appeared. And I think that's really important from the point of view of the films that we've been watching and talking about, as well as this, because there is a very fine line in modern day warfare between being a murderer and being a hero. It's much less clear cut than it might once have been in this sort of post-Clausewitzian type of war.